On this special election edition of Independent Sources, never too early, are the growing ranks of immigrant political hopefuls ready to seize the reins of power in New York City.
And courting the ethnic vote, why some ethnic communities may be steering clear of voting for one mayoral hopeful.
Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Pierre-Pierre.
And I'm Vianora Vinca. The city's election machine will be hitting its high gear in the next few weeks when the primaries are held on September 10th. This year, apart from the mayoral race, the posts of city controller and public advocate are also up for grabs, along with the majority of city council seats.
A number of immigrant politicians are in the running for these seats, some of them in areas where they're not the ethnic majority. I'll talk to political strategist Patrick Jenkins about this trend and what it will take for these candidates to win.
Before that, Menglin Wang profiles Natraj Bhushan, an Indian lawyer who is running in a traditionally Russian section of Brooklyn.
Because I view myself, and I think others in the district view me as a bridge builder, my goal is to start with my pocket, my ethnic base, and then sort of spread out with the younger generation, the younger Russians, the younger Ukrainians, the younger Turkish individuals.
We'll have men, women, Hispanics, have African Americans, Russians, Turkish people, whatever. Yeah, and it's like very Jewish, exactly.
My name is Natraj Salival Bhushan. I'm 26 years old. The position that I'm seeking is New York City Council, District 48. I'm currently an attorney. Most of the residents of my district, which comprises of Brighton Beach, Sheepshead Bay, Manhattan Beach, parts of Midwood, parts of Coney Island, and Homecrest, predominantly Eastern European. But I'd say about 20 to 25% of them, based on the 2010 census, are minorities. They are of Asian descent. One of the things that I've noticed is, especially with the South Asian community, there's always difficulty from local leadership, for instance, city council, assembly, senate, either because of religious differences or cultural differences. They're just not able to break the barrier and reach out to the community. Myself, having grown up in this immigrant background, I've been accustomed to that. Going out into the community and actually greeting different members of different ethnicities, I understand the greetings that sort of help one get accustomed to being able to open up and actually share your issues.
Random minorities are being searched by the police and all that. He's looking to reform all that. So his office is backing me too.
So currently in this race we have 2 lawyers, aside from myself. We have 1 community board chair. We have 1 Russian-American journalist. And we have a founder of a civic patrol group. I think one of my disadvantages, if you haven't noticed, is that I am young. That when it comes to the political scene, I don't have the clout that one of the other candidates may have. So I think when people look at that in a political race, they say, well, he doesn't stand much of a chance. But I think when people actually get out and meet you and understand the issues and understand that, I think I can counter the fact that I'm not as old or as seasoned as some of the other candidates.
The elections in any part of the country, in any community, the results can be quite sensational if you try to put on, to measure simple issues as skin color or religion or language against real life issues. So I understand that the 48th district now has so many pressing issues, especially after Superstorm Sandy, that means more to the voters than any other issues that might be put against them in the election. So those candidates that could address these issues in a sensible way and could hear the constituents, not only Russians, they will have better chance to succeed in the election.
The other notable thing about that district is that it includes Midwood, which has a very large Pakistani and South Asian population. And so if he can tap into some of that vote, and that, you know, mobilizes the people, you know, he might have a chance. But immigrant politicians, the important thing is that, you know, there's a base of ethnic group of their own ethnic group as voters, you hope, but they have to be able to move beyond that. They have to find stories and messages and policies that resonate across ethnic groups.
Just getting out into the field, actually meeting the constituents, talking to them about their issues. I mean, that's what I enjoy doing. As an attorney, when someone walks through your door, the first thing you do is stop and listen. And I think as a city council member, we cannot assume that we know what's going on in our communities. I just feel that we're not doing the best job possible. I think we're content with status quo. I think currently we do have clock watchers, you know, it's 4:45, I gotta go home. The bottom line is, this is public service, you know, and people do have many, many, many issues.
Patrick, the last 25 years in New York City, we've had a huge demographic shift. People from Bangladesh, from continental Africa, have been coming here in large numbers, and now we see them participating in the political process. Is it too early for them to get into this game, if you will?
Not at all. It's never too early to get involved in your community, to get involved in trying to help other people. I think it's innate in a lot of people. So it's never too early to do that, and the more people do get involved, the more they'll be able to understand the process, and the more that they'll be able to affect the process.
What's fueling this interest in politics among these new Americans? Because in the past, new Americans were not involved in the political process as much.
Well, I'm not sure if that's true. I think new Americans have always been involved in the political structure of their communities. But I think nowadays, I think people are very aware. There's a lot of information. You have the internet, you have newspapers, 24-hour news cycle. It keeps people much more involved than they used to be and a lot more aware of what's going on as opposed to the past. And I think that intrigues a lot of people. I think people see it as a vehicle to help their communities, and I think people see it as a vehicle to get a message out if they have an agenda.
The newcomers, the Africans, the South Asians, when do you see them getting involved, not just getting involved, but dominating, if you will, vis-a-vis their numbers in various areas in the city, given that in the past it is taking 20, 30 years? Where is this process shortened now, or is it still the same?
I think it's still the same, but I think the dynamic is different. I think that it'll be hard for any one culture to dominate in a borough per se. I think we have an increased amount of diversity, an increased amount of immigration, especially in New York City. And I think that you've had a lot of people whose children immediately aren't really staying in the communities. Their children are going off to college. They're finding a better life. They're going off to college. They're moving to other cities like Middletown, New York, Spring Valley, New York, towns, you know, places where maybe they were not, we were not always, as minorities, quick to move to. We're becoming a lot more suburbanized. So, and also our communities are just not as homogeneous as they used to be. It's just a great story about New York, that the immigrant community has fueled our population, but also fueled mobility and fueled the ability of people to live. Either Dominicans moving from Washington Heights into the Bronx, or Puerto Ricans moving from the Bronx to Middletown, New York. So we see the migration all around, and also people from the suburbs, their children are now moving back to the city.
Now, so how does a candidate mount a campaign? Is it, you definitely have to reach across different ethnic lines, and how do you do that?
Well, I think running on an ethnic platform is very difficult because city services are not ethnically based, and
sometimes
you know, potholes, well, maybe targeted, but the potholes have no ethnicity to them. So I think that the process involves them getting involved at the very minute levels. That could be, a lot of people are involved in student activism. We see a lot of people who are now running were active in their student governments, getting involved with the community board or a civic association. The pathways are still the same. I think that it's very difficult to run on a very single-minded ethnic platform as it maybe in the past, maybe back in the early days when the Irish could run, things like that, or the Italians. It's just not like that anymore. We're just too diverse, and even within ethnicities, we have a lot of diversity.
Exactly, differences based on regions, whether you're from, whether you're urban or rural.
Right.
In the Bronx, we have about 3 or 4, if not more, Africans running for various positions. Again, I go back to my question, is that smart, or is it diluting that vote? Is it dividing that community in some ways?
No, I think that at the end of the day, most of the people will find a person that they want to support. And I think it's good for the conversation to happen. Again, running on an ethnic platform is very difficult when the numbers don't match up. So say in a city council district where there's 160,000 people and possibly somewhere around 17,000 to 25,000 people will come out to vote for that seat, you do divide a vote up, but at the same time, in order for you to really win and get a handle on that, you would have to reach across lines. You would have to talk about the issues from a very specific standpoint and not really based in a cultural way.
Sure. What are the tactical alliances that you have to make as a candidate to win, whether citywide or a local election? I mean, it's not, again, as you said, it's not just the connections with your group or with people in the community, but what are the other levels of power you need to tap into?
Sure. Well, government service or elected service is becoming a lot more professionalized. And what I mean by that is...
So you make your living doing it.
Well, yes, I make my living doing that. And you have to have the ability to fund a campaign. Campaigns are starting to cost a tremendous amount of money. So
give us an idea
you
how
have
much we're talking about for a city council
For
race.
a city council race, the most you can spend is about $160,000 if you have matching funds added in there. And that's a significant amount of money. So when you're looking at having $160,000, it's going to be very hard to raise that type of funding, especially with the limits and caps in one community. So you definitely have to have a broad base of appeal, and you also have to speak to the issues a little more broader than it used to be. It used to be you can talk about something happening, say, in the Bronx on the Grand Concourse, but now you have to talk about how the Grand Concourse has a relationship to West 34th Street and City Hall and maybe streets in Queens.
Does that make it more difficult for a candidate?
I think it makes it more difficult. Yeah, for candidates definitely to have a broader appeal. It's hard to just come up with a small nugget of support and then be ushered into an office. So I think you need to be able to speak to larger groups of people.
And what about the political clubs? What role do they play in pushing a candidate?
Well, the political clubs are basically brown troops, and they also have a message. Political clubs have an agenda, and they give people an opportunity to show and prove. And I think that that's the value of them. They give people an opportunity to show how much service they want to give, how much time they want to dedicate to it, how much commitment do they have to the community. Because the folks in the Democratic Club are there on their own volition. They're there volunteering, they care about the community, they want things better for their community and their children, and so they're there working from the heart. And so if you're not working from the heart, you're going to have a hard time rising and showing leadership in those groups.
Just to be clear, there are Republican clubs as well. You mentioned Democratic clubs.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, Republicans in New York City are not really prominent, but we really have a large registration. But there are Republican clubs, and they do the same types of things. And Democratic clubs and Republican clubs do the same thing. They serve the community, do food drives. They help during tragedies like Hurricane Sandy. They come and talk about the issues that are important to them, the very basic issues that people face in their everyday lives, be it transportation issues, services, sanitation, parks. They care about those things.
Do you find that the new candidates talking this talk, do they get it? Do they understand that you have to go beyond your specific group?
Well, most new candidates that I meet are not really prepared to go into the public sphere, but I think going through that process gives them that awareness. I mean, you start off with the idealism, a lot of people with the idealism or the ego, and all of a sudden, you know, all of those things can be handled by being a candidate. I tell you in a minute, I've seen a lot of candidates enter the process with grandiose ideas, and the reality of seeking out support, asking people for their vote, asking business leaders for their advice, actually is a pretty humbling experience.
All right, well, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Patrick.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Stay tuned. When we come back, why one mayoral candidate may have a disadvantage courting the ethnic vote.
Thanks for staying tuned to our special election episode of Independent Sources. There's been some discussion amongst a few members of the city's ethnic media as to whether one candidate in particular is at a disadvantage when it comes to courting their various communities.
Some of these reporters believe that City Council Speaker Kristen Quinn's sexuality may turn off their readers who have more traditional religious beliefs.
I spoke with Abu Taher of the Bangladeshi paper Bangla Patrika and Mitra Kalita, the ideas editor at Quartz magazine. We talked about whether Speaker Quinn can still sway some of the ethnic vote. Abu, the South Asian community is one of the most coveted ethnic voting blocs. Tell us how comfortable are some groups within the South Asian community with the fact that Christine Quinn is lesbian?
I think the South Asian, most of the South Asian, they are not so comfortable to, support a gay or lesbian person because it's kind of culture, South Asian culture. Still the South Asian, they believe on man and woman relation and family as well. So I think this is the only issue. And Christine Quinn, she is a open, lesbian. And that would be, I think, one of the issue in our in South Asian community as well as Bangladesh community, which I represent. In Bangladesh community, and I'm here about 22 years now doing the journalism, and still I don't find any open gay or lesbian in our community. According to census this year, I think about 76,000 or 80,000 Bangladeshi living in New York City. But
there are no open Bangladeshis, openly gay Bangladeshis in New York City?
None, we found, none. Openly, none.
That's very interesting. Let me toss the conversation to Mitra Kalita. Mitra, in your coverage, how do you feel that the communities that you cover perceive Christine Quinn due to the fact that she's gay?
So I would caution against seeing the immigrant vote in New York as a monolith because you have many fabrics of that. So there would be people who, as Abu says, might be incredibly uncomfortable in their friend circle. They couldn't name any gays or lesbians. But I think you could say the same for some mainstream communities, right? People who've lived in this country their whole life and, might be able to say the same, or at least open about their sexual orientation.
But with the ethnic groups, you assume that they come to New York with a certain culture and religion, as Abu has pointed out, whether the Americans who have been here living in New York for a while, you tend to believe that they tend to vote Democratic anyway, and they wouldn't have issue with someone's sexuality.
So I think that's exactly what you're striking on here is a generational divide and also a how much you're hanging on to the country of origin. So, for example, every year the India Day Parade, marches down Madison Avenue in August, and for years the South Asian Gay and Lesbian Association was trying to march in that parade and would be repeatedly blocked by parade organizers, and then a few years ago was finally allowed to march. And that was seen as a real breakthrough for the community because it was kind of this embrace of this group, right, and its right to be represented in a South Asian, which is like probably the the kind of capstone South Asian event in New York City. I think among some Latino immigrant groups, you might be seeing, and this is of course the most coveted immigrant group in New York City, would be the Latino vote. A lot of watchers think it's actually going to come down to this population that decides the mayoral election. I think it's a similar situation where it depends on, the how, even if they're religious, is it which church within which church is it? Is it a Unitarian church, which perhaps allows, gays and lesbians to worship as well? And I live in Jackson Heights, which has one of the city's largest immigrant populations, but also one of the largest population of immigrant gays. And I think the danger we make in seeing them as two entities that are at odds with each other is that it doesn't acknowledge the overlapping community, which I can tell you every day on my way to the train station definitely exists. That there's a thriving nightclub scene of gay bars along Roosevelt Avenue. Their clientele is largely Latino immigrants. As a result, it's also actually lured some other gay populations in from Chelsea and the Village to actually move to Queens, and so we have this really interesting overlap just in my neighborhood, but I think that is represented in the rest of New York City, where it's hard to just define people as a Russian Jewish immigrant who lives in Brooklyn and will only vote for a candidate that identifies exactly as they do. And I think a lot of immigrants have learned to cross various borders when they step into the voting booths. So this will be interesting. And the other thing I would say about Christine Quinn is that she has positioned herself definitely in recent months as immigrant and minority friendly.
Well, let me toss the conversation to Abu and ask him how much has Christine Quinn in fact courted the ethnic vote? Some other candidates have been very aggressive in doing so. What about her?
Since, I don't know whether the other community, but if I talk about Bangladeshi community, then I would say John Lou is very active since it's been a long time. He's going door to door almost. And even sometimes in a birthday party, you will see John Lou there in Bangladesh community. He's doing, I think, very good fundraising in our community, as well as South Asian community. Bill Blasio as well, he's trying now, goes to everyone's doors. Bill Thompson, also a very known person in the community. But Christine Quinn, I don't see yet any big groups who are supporting from Bangladesh community or form a committee that they will support. And she don't show up yet. I don't see any program which she show up there as a friend of Bangladesh community.
Why do you think that is?
This is I don't know. Might be her campaign could say about it, but the other candidate, they are very aggressive to attract the community.
Is there anything she can do to win over the South Asian bloc, or do you think that even though we don't want to speak to it as a bloc, just as Mitra has hinted at earlier?
I think she has to go to the community. She has to be open to the community that, okay, look, I'm your friend. Though she has a sexual orientation, as Mita, she mentioned that it's a generation as well, because the old generation might be they are not comfortable very much, but the new generation, they they are not so conservative like the old generation. Might be they will be open and they will support because of her program. But she has to be, she has to go to door because I think this year the South Asian vote will be determining factor in New York City election.
Mitra, a final thought from you?
Well, I sort of on this question of how she can appeal, I think Abu is absolutely right that John Liu has been, he himself is, of the immigrant community, and so therefore his courting that vote has been somewhat more natural. He's also, has represented Queens, and so there's some element of showing up at the birthday parties that is actually sincere and not necessarily politically motivated. Although, that's another question as well. And so, I think in the case of Christine Quinn and what she can do, the one thing that she has going for her is that her policies have been largely immigrant friendly as far as, supporting the DREAM Act and allowing undocumented immigrants to qualify for reduced tuition. And she does have a track record she can stand on from a policy perspective, but I think John Liu, as Abu pointed out, has very much positioned himself as one of the people. And the question for voters is, what they're going to be voting for when they enter that booth. Is it the candidate who they identify with as a fellow immigrant, or is it the one who might have been pushing and advocating for policies that are indeed favorable for them? And that's kind of the essence of the question here.
We do have to end the conversation here, and without doubt, if Christine Quinn wins the mayoral race, as one article put it, it will send a signal around the world that homophobia and politics maybe do not mix in the 21st century. Abu Taher and Mitra Kalita, thank you both for being in studio with us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching our special look at election 2013.
Till next time, be independent-minded.